The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Restaurant Canada's Emergency Rent Subsidy Q&A session with the Canadian Revenue Agency. My name is Lauren Vandenberg. I'm the Executive Vice President of Government Relations at Restaurants Canada, and I am your moderator. The Government of Canada is taking targeted action to support Canadians and Canadian businesses, nonprofits, and charities that continue to face uncertainty and economic challenges because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Providing rent assistance directly to business is a key ingredient for restaurant survival, and the new Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy provides direct commercial rent or property expense support to tenants and property owners of qualifying organizations affected by COVID-19. This webinar will help you get your CERS questions answered, and you'll be able to learn what your business can benefit from with the new CERS program and what the program eligibility requirements are. We'll dive into specifically what lockdown support is, and if your business qualifies for it, how to apply for CERS and what the process looks like, and what the financial benefits are for your operation, as well as how to retroactively apply for and claim the rent subsidy retroactively. I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't acknowledge the disclaimer currently on the screen. The key objective of the measures put into place by the federal government to respond to COVID-19 is to reflect the immediate needs of Canadians and support the post-crisis economic recovery. As such, there may be updates to the measures after this session is held. The CRA would like to remind everyone that any potential changes may affect the accuracy of the information shared during this session. The questions gathered during this session will also be considered by the CRA in its ongoing communication efforts. You can find more information on the most relevant information on the CRA's website. So before we get started, I do want to let you know that you can submit questions by typing into the questions area of the control panel. You may send your question anytime during the presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available in a few days, and participants will be sent a link to the webpage. It is now my pleasure to kick things off with our first speaker, Justin Berrybe, Special Assistant Ontario West and North from the Office of the Minister of National Revenue. Justin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Hello, my name is Justin Berrybe. I'm the Regional Advisor for Ontario West and North. And on behalf of the Minister of National Revenue, the Honourable didnt, I'd like to thank you for participating in today's call on the new Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy. This program is the 7th economic support measure from the federal government in response to COVID-19. And I know many of you have been waiting for this program, and I can assure you that the agency has worked very hard to roll out the rent subsidy as quickly as possible. Canadians are all hard at work fighting the second wave of the pandemic, and we are aware that the road to economic recovery remains long and uncertain. We know that your businesses continue to adapt to new ways of operating, gradually opening it up while protecting the health and safety of your employees and customers. The CRA worked hand in hand with the Department of Finance and with the help of colleagues across government to create the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy and make it an improved version of the previous rent subsidy program. We wanted to make sure it provides the support you need to get through this difficult time. We are confident with the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, hence the importance of it being easy to access and a guarantee of confidence and stability. The agency is committed to providing you with the information and support you need to take advantage of this program. I hope you have found the information shared on this call useful. Lastly, I want to reiterate that we appreciate the working with stakeholders in creating and running these programs. As you know, we changed the criteria to include rent payable as an eligible expense based on stakeholder feedback. On behalf of the Honourable didnt, I thank you again for your collaboration and participation on this call.
Thanks so much, Justin. Next up is Randy Hewitt, Director General, Legislative Policy Directorate with the Legislative Policy and Regulatory Affairs Branch. Randy?
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Randy Hewlett, Director General of the Legislative Policy Directorate at the Canada Revenue Agency. We are proud to administer the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy on behalf of the Government of Canada. As with the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, a wide range of organizations are eligible to apply for the rent subsidy. These include sole proprietorships and taxable corporations, certain Indigenous government-owned corporations, nonprofit organizations, partnerships consisting of 50% or more qualifying organizations, and registered charities. The rent subsidy has two elements. The first is a base subsidy of up to 65% of eligible expenses for all qualifying organizations that are experiencing a decline in revenues. The base subsidy rate varies depending on the organization's revenue decline and applies to a maximum of $75,000 in eligible expenses per location and an overall maximum of $300,000 in eligible expenses for an organization and any affiliated entities per claim period. Eligible expenses include commercial rent, property taxes, including school taxes and municipal taxes, if these are a part of your property tax assessment, property insurance, and interest on commercial mortgages, subject to certain limits for qualifying property, less any subleasing revenues. Any sales tax component of these costs is not an eligible expense. The second element of the rent subsidy is lockdown support, an additional top-up of 25% of eligible expenses for organizations that are under a lockdown or have significantly limited activities due to a public health order. The lockdown support rate applies to a maximum of $75,000 in eligible expenses per location and is prorated based on the number of days in a claim period that the lockdown was in effect. Locations must have been under lockdown for 7 or more days during the period, and there is no cap on the number of affected locations that can be claimed under lockdown support for a period. Eligible organizations must qualify for a base subsidy in order to qualify for lockdown support. The government recently proposed an amendment to the rent subsidy that would allow participants to include eligible expenses in their application before the expenses has been paid. The CRA will administer the rent subsidy on the basis of this proposed amendment. This means that qualifying organizations can include rent and other eligible amounts that are payable for the claim period in their rent subsidy application, even though they have not paid the amount yet. However, organizations must pay the amount owing within 60 days of the payment to them of the related rent subsidy amount. Organizations will be required to attest that they will meet this condition as part of the rent subsidy application. The rent subsidy is currently in place until December the 19th, 2020, with future parameters to be rolled out in 2021. Thank you. Mark Mayer, over to you.
Thank you, Randy, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Mayer, and I'm the manager for the Authorization Strategy and Operations section in the Assessment, Benefit, and Service branch of the CRA. I'd like to talk a little bit this afternoon about the application process for the rent subsidy. So qualifying organizations can apply retroactively for the rent subsidy's first eligibility period, which began on September 27th and ended October 24th. Organizations can apply through the CRA's My Business account, or their representatives, including their employees, can apply through the CRA's Represent a Client portal. Applications for the second eligibility period, that is from October 25th to November 21st, open today, November 30th. We appreciate how important the rent subsidy is to eligible organizations, and we're making it a priority to deliver subsidy payments as quickly as possible. The CRA has rent subsidy web pages and a calculator to support applicants. The rent subsidy web pages include detailed information and instructions about who can apply, how the claim periods are structured, and the types of expenses that can be claimed. The rent subsidy calculator guides applicants through a step-by-step process that will show them the maximum support they qualify for based on the information that they provide before they even apply. The calculator also includes a printable statement feature that applicants can use to enter required information into the application form, enabling organizations to submit their claims quickly and easily. We have purposely designed the rent subsidy online. the rent subsidy's online content and application process to mirror the wage subsidy, and those that have benefited from the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy should find this process very familiar. I'd like to add that in developing the rent subsidy web pages and calculator, the CRA again received input and feedback from many stakeholders, including Restaurants Canada, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and the Chartered Professional Accountants Canada. We appreciate the important role that stakeholders are playing in providing feedback about how the rent subsidy program will operate. As we collect applications, we will refine our automated verification process based on the information that we gather as we receive applications. My colleagues will speak more about our verification process in just a few moments. Applicants are encouraged to take time to visit the rent subsidy web pages at any time, learn more about the program, calculate their rent subsidy, and then apply at a time that's convenient for them. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our colleague, Kevin McKenzie. Over to you, Kevin.
All right, thanks, Mark. So my name is Kevin McKenzie. I'm the Director General of Business Compliance in the Collections and Verification branch at the CRA. I'll just take a few minutes to outline a little bit about how the verification process works. As of today, November 30th, the CRA is processing applications through our automated verification system, and we'll begin issuing payments within 3 to 8 days. We encourage applicants to register for direct deposit, as this is a way to enable them to receive their payments faster. As my colleagues have said, we're making it a priority to deliver rent subsidy payments quickly. At the same time, we need to maintain the balance between making emergency funds accessible and ensuring programs integrity by verifying that applicants are entitled to receive the subsidy amounts they're claiming. So to this end, the CRA will verify claims using a combination of automated validation, drawing on existing data that we hold, and in some cases, follow-up contacts, likely phone calls, to verify certain elements of a claim before we issue a payment. Certainly, we know that there's going to be situations where the CRA does not have all the information about a claimant on file, or where we don't have enough information in our files to verify a claim. In these situations, we may contact the applicants to request additional information, supporting documentation related to the claim. You can imagine things like rental or lease agreements might be fairly common. We also may contact third parties to validate information, such as mortgage payments. And if you are contacted, or if an organization is contacted, we certainly encourage them to provide the additional information as quickly as possible to help us expedite processing of applications. And I'll just say, for situations where we contact third parties, we're encouraging them to respond as quickly as possible in the interest of processing the application. So with that, I think I'll give the floor back to our moderator, Lauren Vandenberg at Restaurants Canada.
Thanks so much, Kevin and Mark. I'd now like to introduce Denise Eisner, Senior Content Strategist, Digital Design and Production Directorate with the Public Affairs Branch. Denise, over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. And I will be given control of the screen so that we can begin the demo. Okay, and it appears that the screen is showing. So with that, I will start. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Denise Eisner. I am Senior Content Strategist with the CRA, and I'm also the Product Manager for the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, leading the digital team that produced this version of the calculator. And I'll walk you through a few of the pages. As was mentioned before, this may feel familiar to you if you applied for the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, and there's a good reason for that. We do a lot of testing of our designs to make sure that they're usable and that the content is as plain language as possible to make it easier for you to understand the eligibility criteria and all the rules that go into applying for the subsidy. So you'll see some things that are very familiar. For those of you who are new, I'm going to show you some of the overall structure to give you a little bit of a familiar roadmap for when you come and visit the web pages. You'll see where the starting point, where you can go from here. Finding out in the first 3 sections about who can apply, when you can apply, the claim period dates, and very importantly, the expenses you can claim. I strongly urge you to take a look at these pages and become familiar with the rules here, because this will make this process go much simpler. Of course, the key thing is calculating your subsidy amount. And here again, you'll find some similarities with wage subsidy, but we've learned from how people were using that calculator and use some of the findings to produce something we hope is going to be very straightforward for you to walk through. If you're interested in how the subsidy is calculated, we've given you that information here, so you can figure out how the numbers work behind the scenes. If you would like to move beyond that, you can go right into the checklist. This is a really important step. It'll make this process a lot easier once you know you've done these particular things, that you've determined you are eligible for the rent subsidy, that you have your revenue amounts, your qualifying revenue amounts at the ready from both 2020 and 2019. You have your eligible expenses broken down by business location, and whether you have affiliated businesses or entities. And once you have these things at the ready, you're ready to use the calculator. A couple things to note before you get started. Number one, we do not collect your information. And secondly, if you have to refresh this page for any reason while you're using the calculator, it will not save the information. So if you were to inadvertently close your browser, unfortunately, that work would be lost. So we advise you to keep your browser session open until you're fully done with doing your calculation. The first step in this very short calculator sequence is to first select the claim period. And as of today, we have 2 showing. For the purposes of the demo, I'm going to pick period number 1. Your second step, determine if you have any affiliated businesses. There are helpful hints on what this means, and you can read more about what an affiliated entity is and find out even more information through some links. If you're familiar with the concept, you can go ahead and answer the question, are you having any affiliated entities as part of this calculation? For purposes of demo, we'll say no. And along the way, we give you a little bit of a reassurance that that step is completed. So you can see in these gray boxes what's been done. Now you're ready to do the calculations. The first thing you want to do is pick how you're going to compare your revenues. For the purposes of the demo, we're going to compare September and October this year with last year with some numbers just to show kind of a process here. And you can see underneath in this gray area, it automatically started to do the calculations for you. This is the real bonus of having the calculator. It does a lot of this math. And as you make these entries, you will see it populate immediately. In this case, you're getting the maximum subsidy rate of 65%. If you were to adjust these figures in any way, and update your revenue drop, you would see that corresponding rent subsidy rate change. For the purposes of this, I'm going to go back to my original numbers. Recalculate, we go back to 65. Now the next step is to help you figure out your lockdown support rates. So what we've done is the baseline piece, now we're doing the lockdown piece. For this, you will have to enter in some information per business location. So the purpose of the demo, we'll just name this location as with the street address. And now we would need to determine, did this location qualify for lockdown support? So this question is very much tied to this particular location. In this case, we're going to show yes. Now you're asking yourself, well, maybe I'm not sure what all the qualifying criteria are. Again, we try to provide the information at the point of need. So if you're not sure, you have the information here, and it's very detailed. It gives you all the rules about what qualifies for lockdown support. As you move down into the calculator, you'll see we've already done some of the work for you. The period dates are already there, and you notice the period dates September 27th to October 24th. And it immediately calculated that because you were closed due to the restrictions for the full 28 days, your lockdown support rate is 25%. If, however, you were partially closed during that period, meaning you were not closed the entire period, you can make adjustments to these dates and recalculate, and the rate will automatically recalculate for you. For the purposes of the demo, I'm going to go back to the 24th and increase it back to 25%. Now, your next decision, do you rent or own? One of the things that we heard from stakeholder groups was that the 28-day claim period doesn't really map very well to a monthly period. So we've done the math for you, where you can calculate either monthly, which would make probably sense for a lot of folks, or you can actually manually input those numbers. But if you'd like to do it monthly, then your next step is to put in your rent amounts for September and October and any rental income. So for the purposes here, we're going to say that our rent expense in September, October of this year was $5,500. And below, you have your summary, and you notice right away that those numbers are lower than the amounts I entered, and that had to do with the fact that it's calculating the 28-day amount and putting it here, and then giving you your support amount in a summary. And you can continue to keep adding your locations. At this point, you have, before you get your final results, you can look at all your location information. And this will help you see at a glance, as well as save the information for your records, location by location, the rent amounts, and your total subsidy. Now we're at the last step, calculating your total rent subsidy. In this panel, we've put the amounts from the calculator along with the line numbers you're going to put that will correspond with the application. So you now have a one-to-one match between the numbers you'll have to enter and the line numbers in the application form. Hopefully this will help you speed through that application form with the numbers you receive from the calculator. And then finally, you'll get your total amounts. So in the case of where we had put in $5,500 in monthly rent expense, the calculator has shown this amount as your total CERS. You can also print and or save to PDF the figures in this panel, which we strongly encourage you for your records. And with that, that's the close of the demo. And I turn back to our moderator, Lauren Vandenberg.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Denise. And thank you all for being here today. We'll now move forward into the Q&A session. Just a reminder that if you have any questions, now is your opportunity to submit those questions into the control panel on the right of your screen. And I will kick it over to Roberto so we can get started with the first question. Roberto?
Thanks so much, Lauren. A lot of great questions coming in, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. I know the panel would love to answer as many as possible as well. But I know we touched on some of these, but they would be good to reiterate. First, does the CERS also cover your operating expenses such as hydro, gas, internet, phone line, business insurance, etc.?
Hi, Roberto. It's Randy here. So there's two types of expenses that, or two types of situations that qualify for the CERS. There's rent, and that for those who rent a property, and then of course for those who own a property, there are expenses. So if you rent the qualifying property, your expenses are basically the rent, including rent that's based on a percentage of sales, profit, or some other method. If you have what they call a net lease, then the expenses that qualify are the base rent, regular payments for customary operating expenses such as property insurance, utilities, common area maintenance, property and similar taxes, and regular payments to the lessor for customary ancillary services. You cannot claim the GST portion of any of those expenses. So if you own the property, you can claim property and similar taxes, including school taxes and municipal taxes, property insurance, interest on a commercial mortgage for the purpose of purchasing a property. Expenses that are not eligible are amounts that are paid or payable for time that fall outside of the claim period, and payments between non-arm's length and related entities are not eligible. So that's a summary of the expenses. That information I gave you is actually on our website.
Perfect, thank you. Moving on to another question in regards to a newer business. There are no baseline numbers for 2019. Can they still apply? Are they excluded? How does that work?
So much like the wage subsidy, the determination of whether or not you meet the required revenue drop is very important. If you're an organization that did not operate until March of 2020, then you wouldn't have a baseline revenue to which to compare your current revenue to, and therefore you would not be eligible for the rent subsidy.
Perfect. Is HST included when you claim your rent and all other expenses? I know you just touched on that. So can I claim my rent and the other expenses, including the taxes that I pay every month?
So no, you cannot include HST in your eligible expenses for the purposes of the rent subsidy.
Moving forward, several of my restaurants have lease agreements with separately registered corporations. However, both the real estate corporation and the restaurant co-op are owned by myself. How do I make sure I qualify under this scenario?
So in a situation, as I noted, where you are renting from a non-arm's length party, the rent that you pay to that non-arm's length party is not eligible for the rent subsidy.
Perfect. We have a legal entity that has many corporate restaurant locations. According to the CERS, I can evaluate each location and derive the appropriate CERS rate. Is the legal entity which owns all the locations also allowed to claim the CERS for their head office rents, multiple locations where the head office employees work?
So I don't fully understand the structure that's being referred to, but the rent subsidy is claimed by the legal entity that owns the property or rents the property. In a situation where that entity has multiple locations, they're allowed to claim the expenses for each of the locations up to $75,000 per location to a maximum of $300,000 in determining the base subsidy. If they're also eligible, one of the locations or more of the locations eligible for the lockdown support, then they can claim up to $75,000 per location, and there's no restriction on the total amount that would qualify or could qualify for lockdown support.
Perfect. Can you please clarify under the heading eligible expenses, what is meant by regular payments for customary operating expenses? What does that include?
So eligible expenses, as I just mentioned, when it comes to certain types of lease arrangements, which are called a net lease arrangement, you can claim regular payments for customary operating expenses. Those would include property, insurance, utilities, and common area maintenance. Also under a net lease arrangement, you can claim property and similar taxes that you may be responsible for, and then other types of payments that are considered ancillary services. So it really would be a fact determination, but I would encourage you to take a look at the complete list of eligible expenses that are on our website. And as we move forward with more types of these stakeholder engagements, we may see things that we think are necessary to add there. So I would encourage you, as was noted earlier, to continue to look at our web pages for the most up-to-date information.
Perfect. I sublease to franchisees and take no profit normally. Some of my franchisees have abandoned and closed their business. I am now stuck paying the lease payments without any income. Can I claim CERS for those locations?
That's a very good question. So I would think that you could, because you are the head lease and you can qualify if you have the requisite the requisite revenue drop as well. But there are issues with renting properties not being qualified. So I really don't have enough information to be able to answer that question. I apologize. Maybe I'll think about it a little bit more afterwards, and we'll see if we can add some information.
Awesome. I know my company qualifies for 65% CERS, which means we're still responsible for 35% of rent to the landlord. If I negotiate with the landlord to forgive some of the 35% not subsidized by the CERS, is there a clause in the CERS agreement that would disqualify me from the full 65%?
So under the legislation, only amounts that are paid or payable and paid within 60 days can qualify for the rent subsidy program. So if you're in a situation where you're actually not paying your landlord and you don't intend to pay your landlord, or you pay only part of it, it's only the portion that's paid that can qualify. So if your rent is $1,000 a month and that's eligible for the base subsidy, and you get $650 as a, I'm using round numbers for simplicity sake here. If you get $650 subsidy, you can't be forgiven $35 or $350 by your landlord and still keep the $650.
Got it. We are a buffet restaurant and is restricted to continue our usual dine-in buffet service by public health order. In order to continue business, we've pivoted to a small eats concept in which customers can place an order and we serve food to the table. As we have had to cease our usual business by public health order, do we qualify for the 25% lockdown support?
That's a very good question. I don't have a specific answer for that right now. I would encourage you to look on the Department of Finance website, where they issued a backgrounder on what would qualify for lockdown support. It goes through the list of criteria and it gives a number of examples. I'll just run through a few of the examples with you. In terms of restrictions on indoor dining, so a restaurant that normally earns 25% or more of its revenues in connection with indoor dining could qualify due to its dining room being shut down if it shifts its activities to takeout. So that's a clear example of where the lockdown support could apply. Similarly, if you close a closure of a bar that is ordered to close down, and then goes to takeout dining, that could qualify. Other types of situations, where there's a requirement for physical distancing. So a restaurant that earns most of its revenues in connection with indoor dining could not qualify due to a public health restriction limiting patrons to 6 persons per table, as it could continue to carry on its indoor dining activities. To my mind, that example fits more closely with requirements for physical distancing. So my gut reaction is that it wouldn't qualify. But as I said, I really don't have a clear line of sight to be able to say 100% for sure that it doesn't qualify. But that would be my inclination.
Thank you. I'm a seasonal operator of food service operations, and I pay about $7,500 a month in rent. Can I still apply for assistance on my rent?
I'm not seeing anything in this question that would prohibit it. Obviously, you would have to meet all of the conditions. You'd have to have that baseline revenue period. You'd have to have something to compare it to, and you'd have to meet all of the other conditions. But this question, is very brief, so I'm not seeing anything there that says you couldn't apply. Whether or not you meet all of the requirements would have to be determined.
On the application itself, do I list my expenses as a total, or does it need to be broken down? I believe the application is only allowing you to enter a total.
So I'm going to turn that over to Mark. I'll just start off by saying that I know that the calculator gives you a good printout of the information you enter on each line item. But Mark or Denise, I'll let you take that question.
Hi, it's Mark here. Yeah, it is the total, so it's not a breakdown. So it's a total of the expenses that goes on the application.
Perfect. We have one company under one business number that owns numerous commercial rental properties, some motels and some restaurants. We know the rental properties are not eligible, and all but one restaurant have not suffered a revenue loss. When I apply, do I include the revenue from the entire company, but only the expenses related to the restaurant in question?
So that's a great question, and it comes up a lot. It even came up in the wage subsidy. So important to remember that the application is made at the entity level, even though it's the expenses that qualify per location for the subsidy. And when determining whether or not the requisite revenue drop has been met, that is done at the entity level. So you could be in a situation where you have multiple lines of business within the one entity. Some are doing well, others maybe not so well. And the ones that aren't doing so well could be impacted by those that are doing well in determining the revenue drop, which of course is very important in determining the amount of the subsidy.
So this may be a similar answer to the one previously, but I have multiple franchise locations, and those are owned by 4 corporations that are an affiliated group through common shareholders. For the CERS purpose, do I have to apply as an affiliated group, or each corporation of that group can apply on its own?
So generally, if you prepare your revenue financial statements on a consolidated basis, you can determine your revenue drop on a consolidated basis. But if not, you can determine your revenue drop for each of those entities on their own. But as I mentioned earlier, it's the individual entity that actually makes the claim. So each entity would make its own claim on the basis of the locations or location that operates under that entity's name.
Let's see here. And in a franchise system, again, scenario where the franchisor's head lease, does the subtenant or the company on the head lease apply for the CERS?
So I'm not 100% certain about that relationship. So you have a head lease and then you have a sublease. So each of those entities can qualify on their own. I would think that the operating company is going to be in the sublease maybe. So the operating company can qualify, but the rent it paid must be paid to an entity that they're dealing with at arm's length, so they could qualify. And in terms of the head lease, there's an issue there with them claiming the subsidy if all they have is rental income. So really, it's going to be a factor of an exercise, but it's important to remember whether or not they deal at arm's length, and of course restrictions in terms of rental properties claiming a subsidy.
And for clarification from a franchisee and on the eligible expenses, are franchise royalties as well as ad fund covered in that?
No.
Perfect.
So those would not be eligible expenses.
And can you clarify any role that the landlords play in this overall application process this time around?
So that's a good question. So this revamp of federal government assistance for rent is independent of CRA, and under CRA, the landlord had an active role to play. Under this program, there's no role for the landlord.
Perfect. Our business pays a variable rent amount each month based on sales. We have a contract that has been in place for many years. Is this type of rent allowable in the subsidy?
Yeah, and I indicated as much when I went through the calculator, or part of the calculator there, and also in one of my responses previously. Perfect. Percentage of sales can qualify.
In jurisdictions where there are drastic restrictions, such as dining limited to single-family units, can they qualify for lockdown top-up because of a collapse in sales?
Generally not, and I think that was discussed in one of my previous responses where I went through some of the examples there on restrictions on dining, and one of the examples given is the requirements for physical distancing. So a restaurant that earns most of its revenue in connection with indoor dining would not qualify due to a public health restriction limiting patrons, say, to 6 persons per table, as it could continue to carry on its business. Perfect. Or continue to carry on its indoor dining activities, I should say.
Since provinces have different lockdown measures, how do you determine what qualifies? And that kind of speaks to exactly what you were just talking about before.
So that's a great question. Obviously, not an expert in what a public health order is. We would look to the information in the legislation and what's given in the Department of Finance's news release on lockdown support, and they give a really good walkthrough of public health restriction and what it would be. Maybe I'll just take a minute to go through them because that's a very important issue for your members. So a public health restriction, it would be an order that meets the following conditions. It's made under the laws of Canada, a province or a territory, including orders made by a municipality or regional health authority under one of those laws, and in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is limited in scope based on factors such as geographical boundaries, type of business, or other activity or risks associated with a particular location. Non-compliance with the order is a federal, provincial, or territorial offense, or can result in the imposition of an administrative monetary penalty or other sanction imposed by the government of Canada or a province or territory. It cannot result from a violation of an order that meets the above conditions, and it must be in effect for a period of at least a week, so that's a very important concept, so that some or all of the activities of the eligible entity at or in connection with a qualifying property are required to completely cease. So in other words, limitations would be on the type of activity rather than the extent to which an activity may be performed, or limits placed on the time during which an activity may be performed. So, that's a very, I guess, long-winded answer on what is the conditions for, or what are the conditions for, to qualify for lockdown support. So I would encourage your members to familiarize themselves with that and to take a look at the examples of situations that would be covered by lockdown support and those, of course, that would not.
Thank you. What qualifies as rent, base, and how does CAM or common area costs come into play?
So I went through that earlier, but so rent, there's 2 types of rent situations that could qualify. So it's the normal rent situation and the net lease situation. So where you're just paying rent, the rent would qualify. If you are in a net lease situation, then other types of expenses could qualify for the rent subsidy, including common area maintenance expenses that the lessor might be required to pay under the net lease agreement.
Perfect. Thank you. If a business has HST arrears, can they qualify for the program?
So in and of itself, you can qualify for the rent subsidy. I'll maybe turn it over to Mark or Kevin to talk a little bit about, what we, what might happen if there are other amounts owing by that particular entity.
Sure, it's Kevin McKenzie. So I think that the sort of top line answer here is that, issues with respect to non-filing or other parts of non-compliance do not necessarily disqualify a business from being eligible and qualifying for the rental subsidy. There may be situations where the agency determines that the subsidy is approved, but it'd be appropriate to set off perhaps if there was money outstanding somewhere else that was particularly not arranged. But I think strictly speaking, we say the qualification approval is not linked to other sorts of situations where things may not be filed up to date or paid up to date.
Perfect, thank you. If your landlord didn't agree to participate in the CECRA program, is there any way to claim those months of rent?
This particular program, my understanding is, and I don't know the CECRA program at all because the agency wasn't involved in its administration. This particular program starts with the first claim period. I don't have the dates right in front of me, but the first claim period, my understanding is, falls after the CECRA program had ended. And it's only expenses in respect of that were incurred in the claim period that are eligible. So it doesn't look like, and I would say no. So those expenses would not be eligible.
Will the CERS be considerable a taxable income the same way the CEWS is?
Yes. So the amount must be included in income. Of course, you get to claim the expense, but you also have to claim the subsidy as income or offset the expense.
Perfect. And what do I do if I actually own my own property? Is there any solution there?
So if you own your property, so for property owners, their expenses can qualify for the subsidy as well. And I'll just run through those quickly with you. So if you own a qualifying property, your eligible expenses are property and similar taxes, property insurance, and interest on commercial mortgages.
Perfect.
So even though it's called rent subsidy, it does include expenses for property owners.
Got it. There are a lot of very specific case questions here. Do you mind sharing with us again one more time? And we'll be sure to get this out on our social as well as a follow-up in regards in the email that you all will receive with a link to this recording as well as the handouts provided by the CRA. But can you share again where everyone should go to get the specific information they're looking for, and maybe where they can go if they have further questions that need more investigation?
So first and foremost, consult the web pages that were up on that Denise went through in the demonstration. So that those web pages contain a lot more information than just the calculator. They tell you who can apply, the periods you can apply for, the expenses you can claim, which I just went through. Of course, the calculator, how to apply, what happens after you apply, and how to contact the agency. And contacting the agency, we have our telephone lines where people can get answers to questions. And I would also encourage you to consult the initial announcement and the information that was put out by the Department of Finance, because that explains, in broad terms, how this subsidy program is meant to work. We will, of course, at the agency be adding information to our website as we move forward, including more in-depth technical guidance. But for most people, the information they will need is already on our website, and the calculator is a great tool that really can guide you through each step of the process. And there are a lot of little drop-down boxes and menus there that explain technical terms, give you detailed information on, for example, the types of expenses you can claim and some of the expenses that you can't claim. So I would really encourage you to start with the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy landing page, and that will take you through most of the information I just mentioned.
Perfect. And Denise, thank you for sharing that within the chat. So you have the link and URL there for you to access. And we will definitely be sending that link out, as well as I mentioned, the handouts that the CRA provided to give you more information and to help you answer the questions that you may have. But with that said, thank you so much. That brings us to the end of the Q&A. Lauren, I'll hand it back over to you to close us out.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Roberto. As mentioned, that brings us to the end of our Q&A session. We had a lot of really interesting case-specific questions that came up, and I know there was certainly a bit of overlap, but I think that speaks to the eagerness with which this calculator and the legislation was awaiting. So again, we really do appreciate everyone taking the time to both submit questions, and to the CRA team, who has been an excellent resource today in answering as many as possible. If you have any other questions, please contact us directly at Restaurants Canada through your preferred channel. With that being said, I want to thank again our panel for their excellent insights, and to all of you who tuned in, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everyone.